Okay, so we're back. It's Rapid Application Development Lesson 6, Part 1, Multiform Projects. From here on out, when we do stuff for this class, and we're going to do a lot more work with multiform projects. So it's not going to just be one single form you're going to be working on, which means that it's going to change the way you do your wireframes for your assignments, because you're going to do more than one. Which means your external documentation is a little heavier, although you're getting paid the same. When I mean paid, I mean same marks, right? So, and it makes sense because you're reusing some of the stuff. The document is the same. You're still getting a point for your logo, even though it's done, and it was done 2 assignments ago. You're still getting points for that. But you're also, putting more work into it because you require more stuff. So we're going to talk multiform projects for this lesson. We're also going to be talking about some stuff for next week because next week's your midterm, right? We're going to talk about that a little bit today, right? And what probably you're going to be facing next week. People who don't go to class this week or haven't come to class, hopefully they'll listen to or watch the videos. I'll put an announcement up too because there's going to be some requirements for your exam. Things you should probably study, right? And how to study those things because you don't have a textbook, right? So we have to, focus on the parts that I need you to be kind of versed in. So we can talk about that as well. We're also going to be hitting on part of today is I've got another little PowerPoint that I put up called Random Numbers. We're going to talk about random number generation. Even though that's really, from a textbook perspective, if I was following strictly with the text that I used to use, it'd be like chapter 10 or something like that, or chapter 12, right? So I'm kind of skipping ahead to that because I need you to know random numbers for your exam, right? So we're going to do some stuff with random numbers. So we'll talk about that a little bit. And we'll also talk about, when we finish doing this first part, we'll talk a little bit about assignment number 2 and how you guys are doing. So we'll see if you guys are getting along well, if there's questions, all that kind of stuff. I want to answer those things today, even though it's due today. Just make sure that you have some time to fix anything that can be fixed, like a quick fix. Okay, so multiform projects. So when we talk multiform projects, we're gonna talk about again, like I said, multiple forms in your app, right? Because usually you go from one form, you fill it out. It can't be, especially on nowadays with mobile devices, right? If you kind of look at that framework and that context, mobile devices are going to have at least 4 or 5 forms you're going to fill out before from one. And when you go into a utility app, something you need to kind of fill out to finish off your app. Let's say whether it's you're trying to get a result from the form. Sometimes it's maybe just 2, right? But usually it's at least 1 or 2 that come up. So in this context, as we move forward in the course, this is where you're going to be asked to kind of move from one to the other. We're going to talk about an about box. When you go to your help about, how to bring that up, basic stuff. I mean, it's more of a fancy-dancy thing to do. But most programs nowadays have it. We need to create an instance, so instantiate the new form that we're going to show. Okay, so we're moving from one form to the other. In VB, you just have to go whatever the form name is .show, right? But it's not enough in C#. C# requires you to instantiate the form as an object and then show it with the show or show dialog methods. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to show you how to do that, and also how to hide a form and what the difference between hiding and closing it. What do you gain from doing one of those things? Why show compared to show dialog? There's different methods. Why do you do these things when you want to show different forms in your app? And how do you start one form first compared to the other form? How do you do that, right? So we'll talk about those things too. What else? Again, choosing the correct scope for your variables because there's going to be form variables for that particular form, and there's variables you want to pass on to the next form, right? How do you pass data values? We'll talk about those ugly getter and setter methods that we've probably seen in other languages like Java, right, which kind of make you do it, right? Well, C# kind of makes you do it too. You don't have to, but I'm going to ask you to follow this methodology when you pass values from one form to the other. Because remember, each form is a class, right? And we want to encapsulate, use the whole encapsulation part of object-oriented programming when we're passing data along. Okay. And then we're going to talk about a splash screen and what, why a splash screen. Well, from a professional perspective, you make a new app, you want to kind of have a splash screen. It comes up. It doesn't matter if it's an iPhone app or Android app or a desktop app. Usually some kind of splash screen comes up. Good example of that would be, if you're using an Adobe app or Microsoft app, you have that kind of splash screen that comes up that kind of says, I'm loading it up, wait, and I'm giving you a fancy picture, right? So that way you're not bored, right, by seeing some kind of hourglass. And I'm telling you, your program is loading. It's okay. It hasn't crashed, even though it's taking forever, and my program is a pig, right? So that's what the splash screen does. We'll talk about how to do that. And then how to run your project outside of the IDE. This is kind of cool because that means you can actually create an executable and port it onto another machine and use it. So without all, the actual code that other people don't need to see. So we'll do that today. Okay, so let's talk about using multiple forms. So right now we've only done a single form. That's basically what we've done. All single form apps. So how would it, how could you use more than one? You probably thought about it. Maybe you even looked it up because you want to use more than one form. And you may have that, assignment number 2 may have asked you to do certain things also that allows you, to shift between forms and doing different things. Or maybe you're thinking about it, how to do that, right? We're going to talk about exactly how to do it. So lesson 5, we kind of had this summary button that we use in lesson 5. In your hands-on, if you actually do your hands-on project, we're going to look at that again. And instead of an ugly message box, how do we make our own message box with a lot more options? And it's really just another form that we're going to kind of pull up, right? So we're going to talk about that a little bit. So again, a lot of little control over a message box, but if you make a custom form, lots of control, right? And then also, how to declare your startup form. How do we do that, right? Because in VB, going back to that, and any other .NET programming languages, it's not the same how it is here in C#. In VB, you just can go into your manifest and say, this is starting first, right? And in C#, you actually have to go into your main function, your main method, which we haven't even seen yet, right? Normally in Java, you work within main all the time, right? You have your main, and then from main you call other functions. But so far in C#, we haven't seen main. Where the hell is main, right? And it's a C-style language. We should have seen it by now, right? We're going to see it today, right, for the first time, which is kind of weird and backwards in some ways, but it's the way it is. So again, we can add, and how to add forms to your app is really important too. How do I do that? Do I create it from scratch? Do I use the menus? Can I use forms that exist in another project? How do I do that? We're going to talk about that today. So again, if I'm going to add a form, and if you look at your menu, and again, I encourage you to be in C#, not just follow along with me here, but go up into your IDE and try this out. Create your little project. And here I've given an example of a project that has a main form, and then I've added a next form. So main, and then here's the next one, and here's the next one, and here's the next one. So how do we do it? There's a couple ways. One, you can add a Windows form from your project menu, add Windows form. And then if you notice on the left-hand side here, you have under Visual C# items, if you look down, there's another subsection or category that says Windows Forms, right? And then from there you can choose from a list of templates, Windows Form. You might say, well, we're saying it like all these times, Windows Form, Windows Form, Windows Form. But there's other templates, and if you notice, one of them is this About box right here, right? So you can do that as well, right? You can kind of create this pre-made template Windows Form. It's an About box, and it's already pre-programmed for you and bundled so that you don't have to kind of put in the assembly information separate. And we'll talk about what that means, the assembly information, right? And then, of course, here's your form. It'll display underneath the other form, right? Whatever the form is called, right? And again, it's going to be bundled with the other files. That's just the top level that you're looking at there. But the form has multiple files. There's 3 files associated with each form. So if you want to add an existing one, I want to add an existing form. Let's say I already have we talked about this last week, right? We said, hey, you have to develop your own toolbox, right? Something you take with you, so you're not recreating the wheel all the time, right? Because it's bad. If you're a good programmer, you're going to collect successful methods that you're going to put in your back pocket and you're going to pull out when you need them instead of programming them from scratch, right? And that's going to actually help you in your exam, right? Because you've got all these examples up online on Blackboard, and by the way, you'll be able to use your Blackboard for your exam. That'll be available for you. So I'm not going to say, no use of the computer. Of course you can, right? Any of the code you've written for your assignments is available to you, right? You can use it freely if it's going to help, and I don't think it will. But anyways, right? But if you need to look at code to kind of say, well, how did I do this? I don't remember how to do a switch statement, or I don't remember how to, to do a for loop, or I don't remember how to do this or that, whatever I did, or some kind of if statement. Here's how I did it. I can pull that in, right? But here, in this particular example here, there's a few files that come with each form, and there's the code methods that you're going to bring in, because that's kind of, if you actually click on the little arrow next to the form, right, it'll actually pull down little files that are associated with it, and one of them is the code methods. The other one is the visual interface. That's like the design part of the form, and the third part is your settings. So those are like the 3 files that come with every form, right? So all those forms, when you add the existing form, and whatever the existing form is called, you go to that menu. For example, if the existing form is called, I don't know, formname.cs, if you just get the CS file and you add that existing that file into your document, then the other 2 files get added in automatically. So you don't have to kind of add them in separately, just that one. So you can, again, save time for yourself as opposed to do it one by one, and instead of recreating the wheel, if you have a really cool form, like you have an about box that you would like to use, and it's a special one that you've customized for the company, you've branded it, you've got all this kind of stuff, or it's for you, because I've asked you to put logos and stuff, and if I've asked you to put an about box, why would you recreate one again, right? Take it from the last project you did, because that makes sense, right? It has your branding, it has the way you want things. Maybe you've changed the font to make it look a certain way. You've designed, you styled everything again, right? We're going back to almost like web technologies here. Why would I not use the same style sheet, if you will, which is your properties you've changed, right? And you can do that by taking an existing form and throwing it into your document, and then modifying it from there, which is easier than going through every property and changing my form is going to appear in the center of my screen. I want it to use this kind of font. I want this kind of spacing, this kind of padding. I want these kind of controls. You might have standard forms that you've already established for yourself, and this is a good way to use that. And again, you can remove files from a project or forms from a project, no problem, in different ways. One is if you just right-click on the actual form name and delete, it'll actually delete the form and remove it from your project completely. That's one way of doing it. Delete key is another way. And then you can also exclude from the project. So you go to your project menu, you click on the form first, go to your project menu, and you click exclude from project. It'll actually remove the form from your project manifest, but not delete the files, which is a good thing too, because you may want to remove it because maybe it's screwing up your project somehow, right? And you're doing some troubleshooting, and then you put it back in. You can do that without deleting the files, right? So there's options for removing forms from your project. So how do we create this new instance of a form? I want to show a form. I got form A, and I want to show them form B. I talked about this, creating this new instance. And again, in C#, this is what we do, right? So how do we do it? Here's your summary form, right? I have a summary form I've already created, right? My summary form. Every form is a class, like we talked about before, right? And now I'm creating another subform, if you will, an instance of that form, and I called it, in this particular case, a summary form, right, using the C# methodology. I would prefer that you make it more contextual, right? Something that makes sense here. Instead of putting an A, I'm just putting that in there as an example. You have to use the new keyword, because whenever you create a new object, right, in C#, you have to use this new keyword, and then summary form with a parentheses, right, because this is what you're doing, creating a new summary form. And we're using the empty constructor here, right? And again, we haven't talked about constructors or object-oriented programming here yet. So there's nothing in here. There's no parameter you're passing into the class. It's just you're going to just create the form. So I've created this new instance called a summary form, right? And then from there, I'm going to use the methods that are tied into that form, because whenever you have a form, the form class that you're creating is an extension of the original form Windows form that's been created, right? So you have your original form class, your parent class, and you've subclassed it by making your form, whatever it is, right? And now what you're doing is you've created an instance of your subclass, and you're going to use the show dialog method in this particular case. Okay? So this is one way of, again, we're instantiating the form. You have to do this before you show it. Okay? If you try and show your form, if you go like, if your form is like form A, and you have another one called form B, and you want to go form B.show, it won't work. You'll have an error. Right? So don't do that. Because it's not instantiated. At runtime, the only time the form becomes instantiated is at runtime. Right? So that's why it won't work. It doesn't exist yet. You're trying to show an object that doesn't exist. Right? And that's why you have to do this. Okay. So let's look at an about box. So really an about box is just a templated form. Right? So you have a form, and I want to show this form. And let's say if I go to my Help About menu, I want to show my about box. So this is a good example of how to instantiate the about box we're going to show you now, and how to actually show it. Right? So let's see where you get the about box. So this is a typical about box that you can find, right? It looks somewhat like this. If you notice, I picked my old 2008 one, right? I'm going to show you the one that's 2013 later on. This is late night PowerPoint creation error, right? Anyways, but they typically look like this anyway. It doesn't matter whether it's this one or whether it's the one that I'm going to show you later on. And it shows you whatever your project is called, the version, your copyright information, a title for it, and so on, and some description of what your project's all about. Yeah.
So to show the form, you just instantiate it and then run the show dialog.
Or show. Or yeah, there's different options, right? So show, and we'll talk about why show over show dialog, right?
Should you show?
It depends what you want. There's different forms that'll do different things, and why, right? One is moded, moded. Another one is modeless. We'll talk about that, right? So, okay. So let's go to this. So you want to add this about box. Where do we find it? We found it in the same place we found a Windows form. It's in the about box under Windows forms. That's where you find it, right? And typically it'll look like this. This is more the 2013 look, right, with the 2012 framework, right? So it'll come up, it'll create this, and it'll be called About Box 1 by default, but you can name it whatever you want, right? You can call it My About Box or About Box. I've just kept the same name here. So it's added in, and now what we want to try and do is it's going to take the assembly information from your project, right? And where is that bloody assembly information anyway, you want to say? And by the way, when I go to project properties, so if I go to my project menu, and whatever your project name is in the bottom there, is going to come up with properties, right? If you go there, it'll pull up this project properties section here, and I've cut it off here because I can't fit it all on without showing you the most important parts, right? And if you notice, there's different tabs on the left here. One of them is the application tab, there's the build tab. All these things are part of your project properties. If you think about this, this is like, again, like I talked to you before, your project's manifest. So if you're building an Android application, you're going to have something like this for Android. And you're going to have something like this for iOS as well. If you're going to do something in Objective-C with Xcode, it's going to look like something like this, maybe more complex. But basically, you're going to have a manifest for each of your applications, and Visual Studio does it too, right? Here's where you find the assembly information, and what this basically shows you is your version history. Here's what the assembly information gives you: the title of your project, your description, if you have a company associated with it, the product name, right, as an example, your copyright information, so here's 2013, and your assembly information, your file version. And I recommend to you, if you're going to start using GitHub and stuff, and before you do your commit, you change these things, eh? Like this is like, the stuff that you can kind of version your file a little bit differently. So maybe you start off with 0001, right? And then you go to 0002 when you go to the next version, and so on. So you change your assembly information before you save your file, and that way, when you actually do your about box, it makes sense. There's some kind of context there. It's not like version 1. Right? You want to kind of version as you go. And I recommend this. This is built in. You might as well use it, and it looks good too, right? It gives you this GUI ID, right? And this is a unique identifier for your app, right? For your particular app. And again, if you notice, there's a neutral language. There's none. You can also choose the type of language that it's naturally made for, right? And there's other options here as well. But this is your assembly information. It's going to be passed on into your about box. That's what happens. It's automatic. If you choose the about box template, bang, bang, bang. All this stuff you put in here is in your about box. So it's kind of a cool thing. Sometimes we also use it in the splash screen. And I'm going to show you how to do that, right? How to do it in the splash screen. The documentation here that I put up online doesn't do it, but I'll show you inside. Actually, it's inside your code. If you actually go to your code example for your hands-on project later on, I've kind of put it in there. I made the splash screen give me all this information too, and there's a way to do that. We're going to talk about that later on. Okay, so how do we display the about box? So we've actually got this about box. We've used it. We've kind of taken it from the template, and of course, what we got again? Here's the exact same instantiation that we did for the last form, right? We got your about box one, which is the template that we pulled in from our Windows forms, right? And then we created this about form object, right? An instance of the about box, right? And we have to use this new keyword again and about box to create an instance of this object, right? That's what we do here. So here it is. Now we use the show dialog method, and in this case it makes sense to use show dialog because it's an about box. It's got to be like a form that can't be clicked away, right? And we'll talk about what again show dialog as opposed to show, but this would show the form. So example, you go to your help menu, about. You put these lines in, and poof, it comes up. So here's part of your answer to some of your assignments right here. Right. Actually, most of the stuff that I've asked you to do in your assignments, they're all up on Blackboard, all the answers to them, like how to do it. Right. There's going to be some times where I haven't told you exactly what to do because I want you to search it out. I want you to figure it out, and I'll let you know when those times come. Okay. So the methods and events of forms. So we click a menu, a button, or a menu item, and then they come up. And in the event handler, we can use, again, either the show or the show dialog. So really, depending on what you want to do, if you want to use a modal form, right, then you use the show dialog method. Show method is modeless, which means you can have both forms open and just switch between them. And it's not going to stop the flow of your code. Your app is still going to run, even if you have 5 forms up and you can see all of them at the same time. And sometimes you might have an app that needs that, right? But an about box, as an example, is a great example of maybe a form that you need to click away. You need to you can't just leave the about box open and keep working, right? You want the user to kind of click it away, so it's probably better to use a show dialog method, right? So the user in a show dialog method, right, because it's modal, right? He has to respond to it, or the app won't continue at all, right? It'll stop you from doing stuff, right? Here's the other thing. No other program code can execute until the user responds to and hides or closes the modal form. We're going to talk about what's the difference between hiding and closing as well. There's a difference in terms of the way we carry on data, right? So again, modeless forms you can switch without responding to the form as well. You can do that too, even in Windows. You can do that. If you have a modeless form or a modal form, you can still switch between the two things sometimes. So, again, what we want to try and do is say, hey, you've got to respond to this form. Example would be your font dialog box that we kind of talked about last week, or your color dialog. Those are modal forms that come up, and they're usually using the show dialog method to bring them up. You don't have to, though. So here we are. Here's the show method general form again. Whatever your form object name is, .show, and then some examples of that would be let's say you have a summary form, and then again we talked about this. The summary form is the actual form name that you kind of designed here in Visual Studio, and your A summary form here, again, not a great name, but it's kind of like the new object you're creating as an instance of this summary form class. Guess what you're doing? You're using the new keyword, and you're using the name of the class or the form that you've designed to create this instance. And now we're using the show method. And again, this is a form that comes up modelessly. Okay, so it doesn't mean you can click away from this form. You don't have to respond to this one right away, right? Here's a show dialog method, very similar, right? But this is a modal form again, right? So it's going to give the user a notice he has to respond, right, and close the form, and it could either, in your code, it either closes or hides it. Okay, so you can decide what to do there. Okay, yes?
So a good way to use the show dialog, which is modal, right? Show dialog, yeah, it comes over top, would be for like a pop-up or something.
Some kind of pop-up, a message, a custom message box.
Okay, and then the show one would be good if you want to like transition to another screen.
Right.
On the other form. Now, when you do that, should you hide the other form?
We're going to talk about that. What's the advantage of it, right? And there's different advantages to hiding or closing, right? Okay, so very similar there. So here it is, so hiding or closing. So we already know how to close the form, right? This dot close closes the form off, whatever the form is, right? So if we exit on that form, it's gone, right? Well, the close method, right, what does it do, right? For a modeless form, so let's say a form that's using the show method, not the show dialog method, right? If you use close, it destroys the form. So it actually removes that instance of the form from memory. Bye-bye. It's gone. Anything you did in that form is gone. Okay? Data, anything you entered, finished. You know, on a modal form, right? Modal means like a show dialog. You show dialog, and you use a close. So this dot close, it does not destroy it, but rather it's only hidden. An example of that would be your font again, right? We talked last time. We were working on this font problem, this color problem. It didn't come up. And then it would remember the choices you made from last time, unless you specifically told it otherwise, right? So when you close a modal form using the show dialog, you open up the show dialog and you're closing it, it doesn't destroy it, but rather hides it automatically, okay? So a second show dialog method, again, in this case, would bring up the original form with all the information that you had on it, unless you've otherwise changed it in your code. Again, a second, in contrast, and this is a good one, if the second show method creates a new instance of that form that was already open that you closed and destroyed. It's a new instance with everything reset, reinitialized. Okay? So no leftover data. Okay. You can also choose to hide a form. Right? Here's the method, the way you use it. It's whatever the form object name is, hide. Right? Why would you do that? It conceals the form but keeps it in memory, ready to be redisplayed. So it's ready to come up again. Right? You don't want to kill the form because you want to keep the data. You want to maybe go back to it. Right? So you hide it. It's gone. It's not around, and it shifts focus to whatever form you decide to shift the focus to. If you hide all the forms, what happens? You don't see nothing. Right? And in fact, if anything, you're like, so what happened? What happened? Is my program still running? You can't tell a lot of times because your program is hidden. It's not a minimize. It's a hide. It's a form that doesn't show the actual application at all, which has disadvantages. So you can use again, if you're going to show it again, you just use the same method to pull it up again, right? Whatever you used before. So again, here's a summary form. You want to hide the summary form, and then because it might be a modal form that you're hiding, you want to bring it up again, and then it's going to continue to keep you the same information you had before. If you're going to use it multiple times, over and over again. So we've been responding so far to click events, right? Every time we go and use Visual Studio, we double click on the event, right? As an example so far, and all of a sudden it'll kind of create the stub in our code that we can go in there and modify. The code block is created for us, kind of thing. And if you notice, the first day we were here, I erased the code, and all of a sudden our form didn't work anymore. What happened, right? So we're going to talk about why that happened again. But and the reason for that is because the code itself and the designer, the three documents we talked about for the part of a form, they're all linked, right? So if one of them is missing, it's going to give you an error. You can fix it, but it takes some finagling, and sometimes it never works right again, right? Just from a glitchiness perspective, I recommend to you, don't do that, right? And And this is why it's good to use GitHub and everything else to save your work, and you can always step back if you made a big mistake like that. Especially if you've worked on a project a long time, and then all of a sudden you make a mistake like that, that's bad. You should have already, every major change, again, you should kind of save your work. Okay, so again, every time we load the form, right, we activate this .load method. It's actually the load event fires, okay? Every time the form is loaded into memory, okay? The activated event, there's another event that happens for your form. It's called the activated event, and it occurs after the load event and just as the control is passed to the form. So loading the form actually instantiates it in a way, right? Here's my instantiation. I've created the form. It's almost like poof, I've created, I'm teleporting, right? I'm teleporting, and I've got the object that's kind of appearing, right? I'm using my buffers or my transporter, right? And it's happening, right? But it hasn't appeared yet. It's kind of like it's kind of in the middle stage. It's just shifting, right? Once it becomes solid, now the activated kind of fires, right? So the form is in memory when I load it, and when it appears the first time, it's activated, okay? So there's different reasons why you want to use load versus activated. We'll talk about that. Each time the form is shown after it's been loaded or created, right? You're using the activated event, not the load event. So if you're going to shift and hide and show the event again, you want to put your code to make any kind of changes to the form in the activated event, not the load event. The load event only happens once when the form is created. So for example, if you close and destroy the form and you need to put something in the load method because you want to, every time it recreates itself, you want to do something like, I don't know, a set of certain variables or whatever, that's where you do it. But if you want to do it every time it's shown, something happens, right? That's where we put it in the activated portion. And let's look at the sequence of form events in itself. These are all the different, well, most of them anyway, the different kinds of events that you can fire if you do things with forms. So for example, if when I load, again, occurs before the form is displayed for the first time, happens only once. Activated occurs each time the form is shown, right? And this event handler is the correct location for initialization or setting the focus. Because you guys are tired this morning, I think we need to definitely take a break in 20 minutes because I see people zoning out. I don't know what happened. Maybe it's the fog today. I don't know. And then there's the paint event, which occurs every time a portion of the form is redrawn, or if you move the form around. Like if you notice in Windows, if you kind of drag the form around on your screen, well, that paint event fires every time. So if you want, when the form moves, something to happen, like let's say a dialog box come up, say, you sure you want to move my form? Right? You do that in the paint event. I don't know why you'd want that, but just say. I'm just saying, right? And then your deactivate occurs when the form is no longer the active form. So when you move from form A to form B, one form deactivates, even when it's hidden, as an example. That's where you can put stuff in there. And then form closing occurs, right, just about when the form is about to close. So example, I've got my disintegrator weapon, and now I'm killing the guy that I transported, right? And I fired at him. And he's like, ah! Right when he's getting hit by my disintegrator, that's when the form closing is happening. He's dying. He's dying now, right? I'm killing him, right? I'm killing him, and I'm happy doing it. I've got this terrible look on my face, like this. Right? He's not dead yet, though. He's not dead. When he's dead, it's here. Then he's finally dead, right? Yes. Yeah. So I'm ready to close. What do you want me to do? Do you want me to ask the user, are you sure you want to close? All right, that's what happens. Are you sure you want to kill this guy? You have a chance. You can turn the beam off. He's almost dead, right? The same kind of thing, right? So this is the events, the way we do our form. And the way it looks like this is a lot of other objects we have in C# kind of function this way. You can display them and destroy them. And there's different kinds of events that happen when you're instantiating or showing or moving things around. Oh, so going back to this one. Please use this as a reference because you'll need it. When it comes to your thinking, when you're building your code, you're going to say, which event in my form event now I'm talking about, not the button event, not the menu event, but the actual form itself, when it shows or closes or whatever. Which one am I going to choose to put some code in there because I need to do some initialization? Or I have to get some feedback from the user because the user needs to do something here or else his data is going to be destroyed. Maybe he needs to save his information. Right? So figure out where you're going to put that in there. Form closing is a good place to say, Hello, you're going to kill him. Are you sure you want to kill this guy, right? So here's event handlers. Now, typically, again, we kind of had this double-click kind of thing, and then we create the event handler, right? But if you actually go to this little lightning bolt here, which is your event button, right? If you go to this event button, it pulls up another list of all the events. And by the way, you can see there's tons and tons of them for main form, not just the ones I talked about, right? Like background image, you know, all these other ones that you don't need to use right now. Auto size changed. You know, you can actually, listen for other kinds of changes too. But let's say, for example, I want to get this activated event going, right? And I can't double-click on the event to the form to create the event like I do with buttons. I have to go into this lightning bolt and double-click one of these list items, and then all of a sudden that specific event will be bound to your form, right? All three of the documents will be octated, like I said, for your form itself. And this stub, that code block that hasn't been written, it's just a stub, will appear in your code view. Okay? That's how you do it. You double-click on that list, and all of a sudden, any of the events that are in this list can go into your form. Similarly, if you've double-clicked, remember we did this mistake in the beginning, right? And we went, oh, man, I don't need this form load event, right? I want to get rid of it. And it's going to appear here next to the down arrow here, right? Next to the down arrow, there's going to be a little form load event, right? You may want to go in there and just delete it. And if you just take the name out of there, poof, it disappears, right? So that's a good way of deleting it without actually killing your application, right? So that's the place to do it. Variables and constants in multiform projects. So you got a bunch of variables and constants, and we're going to talk about how to use those. So multiple forms, really the scope and access level and all that kind of stuff is really, really important because each form is its own class, right? And you want to keep this whole encapsulation thing going on because we're using object-oriented programming now in this modern world we live in, 2013, right? And we don't want to just, use the public method all the time because it doesn't provide us the right information hiding level. We'll talk about that in a second. So let's talk about encapsulation, for example. In an object-oriented programming environment, each object has properties that exposes value to other objects. Example would be, the form object has a bunch of properties, but you don't really care about some of the minor ones. All you care about maybe is the name property or the text property or whatever. And there's other ones that show up in the form sidebar, right? The properties bar, right? You see all these properties, but there's other ones too. You just can't see them because they're hidden. You don't need to see those. These almost like again, when I think about encapsulation, I think about, well, I drive my car, but I'm not a mechanic, right? So I don't know what's in the engine, kind of thing. I know it runs. I press the accelerator, and I go, unless you want to put like fancy lights like our friend over here, right? He has fancy lights in his car, right? But unless you're that kind of guy, and you're just a guy who like gets into his car, turns the ignition on, or presses the button nowadays, right? And makes his car go, you don't really know what's in the inside the engine. You know how the engine works. You know there's some kind of combustion going on. You might even know there's spark plugs, right? You might know that, right? You might even know how many cylinders you got because someone told you that more cylinders are good, right, for power, right? If you want to really speed on the road and, play out this Mad Max fantasy that you've had all your life, right? But at the end of the day, you don't know what's in the engine. You don't know how to make the car work. You couldn't fix the car, right? And similarly, when we use objects in code, we don't really know how these objects function in the back end, typically. But we use them, right? So that's the stuff that's being hidden from us. Hey, I don't want to really understand. I don't want to know this thing. Don't show me these things. Just let me work with it. Let me use it. I'm a user, right? Okay. So again, when you want to pass variables, you got to use these property methods to pass the variables that we call, in other languages, setters and getters and setters, right? So we'll talk about how to use those. So you need to set up a new property method of a form class, all right? And generally, you need to have a private class level variable to store the value and a public property method that allows you to pass the information to the other classes. How do we do that? So again, there's these property blocks that we're going to create, so-called accessor methods, getter and a setter, or get accessor in C# and a set accessor in C#. That's what they're called. And what we're going to create is these friendly property names. So we have a code name, like an example, we have, I don't know, a summary box. And my variable might be called summary decimal, right? But when we make friendly names for our getters and setters, it's not going to be called summary decimal. It's going to be called summary. Because that's what we want to pass on. Because if I want another person to use my object, I don't want them to go, whatever my object name is called, dot summary decimal. What does that mean to them? It means nothing. They don't want to see the decimal. They don't care about the decimal. They just want to press the accelerator and drive, baby. Right? That's what they want. They don't want to know, anything else. So here's an example of your getter and setter. All right? So you have your private level variable at the top, whatever the data type is, decimal will be an example, right? And the member variable that's there. And then what you have is your public property that you're gonna create this property block, right? This is important, right? Take a look at this, guys, because you need to do this when you pass data from Form A to Form B, and in your exam, you're gonna be tested on this stuff, right? This is what hint. Study this because you'll need it, right? So here's get and here's set, right? And if you notice, it's inside this other big block called property name, right? Whatever the property name is called. That property name is the thing that you're going to be, it's going to be visible to the user, right? You're not going to have it here, a different property name for a getter and a setter, right? You don't need that. And we're going to talk about how you access them. But example would be if you do a getter, right? I have a member variable. An example would be summary decimal, right? And this is where this goes. I return the value of the summary decimal, right, to the person who's asking for it. Okay. A setter, on the other hand, right? This is the other way you can access the value. I take my member variable, right, and I make it equal to this value, right, that I'm getting from the property. So example would be, I want to set the value of my total, right? So I use the setter variable and I put inside there a parameter, which is the value that I'm going to set my member variable to, right? That's the way I do it. Yes. Yes. Correct. Well, it's a good question, and you'll see it with it. No, it's going to be. You'll see what I'm talking about. You're right, right? But the name is the same, right? If you notice the name, it doesn't change. You're not going to have a different name for your getter or setter, right? It's not like that, right? It's using the same property name. So if your property name is summary, right? You can get the summary and you can set the summary. That's the only difference. We'll see how that plays out. Okay, so again, the set statement uses the value keyword. You need to use that to refer to the incoming value for the property. So I put in a parameter inside the value, inside the property that's incoming with my setter, and I assign that value, whatever it is, to my private variable that's going to go into my class. Right? Now it's going to be encapsulated. It's going to be, it's almost like putting the gas into the car, right? Car takes gas, right? The gas into the car, right? You put it in the gas tank. You can't put it inside the front seat. It won't take it in the front seat. It's got to go in the gas tank. It's got to go in you have to open the gas cap to do it, right? Okay, and the get accessor method is similar to the other one, except it returns the value out. So in the gas car example, the value return would probably be some kind of energy, right? Or heat and pollution that would come out of the car, right? That's what you're getting out of it. So here is some, if you wanted to do if you want to set read-only properties, right? So you want to get information, like example would be, here's a great example for you. My private variable is called private decimal pay decimal. So I want to get paid, right? And then here's my property block for my read-only property. So I'm only doing a getter in this particular case, right? So here I'm saying my public, it's a public property. It's a decimal. I have to tell it what type of data type it is. And now instead of pay decimal, like I have here, right, which is kind of non-friendly, I'm calling it pay with a capital P, right? Here I can name it whatever I want, right? With lowercase, like we normally do in C#, right? Here it's capital, and that's what's going to be shown in your, as a property that you can assign for your class. And then when we return, we're actually returning pay decimal, right? We're actually returning the value of this back out, right? If I want to get a read-only property with my getter. So I get the value of my property from my class That's why it's called a get accessor or a getter. Similarly, if we want to write only, same thing, right? Here's hours decimal. Right? I'm giving you lots of examples here so you guys understand this, by the way. I'm not doing it because I want to really be repeating myself over and over again and it's boring, right? Private decimal, again, this is your private variable that's for a class, not available outside, right? Hours decimal is where it is. And here, hours is what's accessible outside, right? Different variable. And then your setter is going to take the value that you put into it from the outside, right, back into your decimal, your private member variable that's going to be part of your class. Okay? So that's a write only. So I can write to it, but I can't read from it. Okay? So there's different options here. You can set it up so you can do both. Right? And we'll show you how that works. So I want to pause here for a second and show you when we actually go from one form to the other. Actually, it's going to show you later on too. But if I go into my Visual Studio environment here, and again, here I have multiple forms, and this is your hands-on assignment for today, right, to show you what it looks like, right? What I have is my billing form. So here's my billing form, right, and I have a bunch of different objects here. And what I want to do is, when I want to move from this form to my summary form, I'm going to activate what? My summary menu item, right? So here's my summary menu item. So if I double click on this, it'll take me to my summary method, right? And if you notice, there's some if statements here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the exact same thing that I talk about when I instantiate my form. So here I am. I'm instantiating the form, right? We're going to see this again later on. Here's my summary form. I'm creating something called a summary form, just to go with the examples. I'm using the new keyword, and I'm creating this new summary form, or this new instance of the summary form I've created, right? By the way, the summary form is right here. If you look down here, it's already been created. I've already designed it. Here it is, right? But now I'm instantiating it. I'm creating an object. Right, so back to billing form. Okay. Before I show dialog, which is down here, so here's where I instantiate it, and here's where I showed it's a modal form, show dialog. I got to do a couple of things. And what am I doing here? I'm saying my grand total, right? So summary form grand total, and if you notice, grand total is a property of summary form, is equal to grand total decimal. What am I doing here? I'm writing a value. I'm writing a value to that form, right? I'm taking my value that's coming, my income data that's housed here in billing form, and I'm using the set method, right, to set the value of my my grand total, which exists on my summary form. I'm doing it here, right? That's a set method, right? It looks like it, doesn't it? But I'm actually assigning a value to it. Here's the value, grand total, decimal, right? And I'm assigning it to my grand total setter, right? That's what it looks like, right? If I was going to get the value, and if it was both a getter and a setter, I don't have to do that. I could say a summary form, whatever, blah, 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 is equal to a summary form dot grand total. That's how the setter, that's how the getter works.
Maybe I'm just used to seeing it in Java.
Yes, with brackets and everything else. Yeah, it's not the same way. You have to say, set this or get this, right? Yeah, but here it's not like that. So then again, for summary form dot average, I'm saying the average. I'm setting the value of my average through a setter, right? Here's my setter, my average setter, and there's average decimal, which is a local variable, right? That I'm assigning to my other form, and I got to do that before all these different things I'm showing. I've got to do that before I do my show dialog, or else they're not going to. The new summary form, will not have the information that I've sent to it. So if I took these out and I went to this form, nothing. I can't pass form data along any other way using proper best practices. There are other ways, obviously, right? Always a way. But we don't want to do it. We want to do it like this. Yes, this is what I recommend you learn how to do. Again, this is in your hands-on would use something like this. So this is good. It's all fine and good. Now, if I go to my summary form, so here's my summary form, and I take a look at the code behind it. So again, different ways to look at the code. If I only want to look at the code behind this form and that's all, I right-click and I can go to Code View or press F7 without creating an event. So here's my code, right? And if you notice here, look, I've got all my setter methods, and I don't have any getter methods in this particular case. And they set the values of these, my grand total, which is the property that's available outside of my class, is a friendly property name. It's a friendly name, grand total, not grand total decimal. Locally, I might call it the same thing as the other form. Grand total decimal belongs to this form class, and I'm getting the value that I've passed into the grand total in here, right? And I'm doing that for each of the setters. So, and I'm doing that before, by the way, before the public summary form initialization. So before I initialize it, I set all the values up here, just as I would if I was creating a constant or a class variable at the top of my class. Okay? So keep that in mind. So this is what I'm doing. I have to be able to do that this way, or else it'll be pretty ugly and messy. We don't want that. All right. Splash screen. We're going pretty quick. I think what we'll do is, I see some of you like nodding off and need to take a break. Before we go into the splash screen, get the second part of this thing, let's take a 10-minute break or so, and we'll return with part 2 using a splash screen.